focus for almost 10 years has been away from this area. Yeah. Now things are pointing us in that direction.
There's different opinions on what shaft that shaft is over the years.
Right.
It's been called 12, it's been called 17. Scientific dating on the wood that come out of it has said that perhaps it's earlier than the start of the hunt.
Jack Begley started on Oak Island as the young guy, Rick Lagina's nephew, learning the ropes, carrying equipment, excited just to be part of the search. Nobody expected him to be the one who cracked it, but that's exactly what happened. In a discovery that blindsided the entire Oak Island team, including Rick and Marty themselves, Jack uncovered a lead so significant, so precisely documented, and so physically verifiable that it doesn't just point toward a $275 million treasure. It identifies the exact chamber, the exact depth, and the exact contents in language so specific it reads like a delivery manifest. Jack found it not through expensive drilling or elaborate technology. He found it by doing something no one else on the team had done, spending 3 winters in European archives, personally researching the historical origins of Oak Island's underground system. While everyone else was on the island digging, Jack was in libraries and vaults across France and Portugal, piecing together a paper trail that led directly to a sealed vault. The discovery includes a notarized historical document from 1748 describing the Island Repository in precise detail, a chain of custody records showing exactly what was deposited, when, and by whom, and a physical artifact Jack found at Oak Island itself that matches descriptions in those documents so perfectly that the probability of coincidence is effectively 0. When Jack presented his findings to Rick, the room went completely silent. Rick, who's been searching for 15 years, said 4 words. You found the answer. Hit like and subscribe, because Jack Begley just went from the youngest member of the team to the man who ended the longest treasure hunt in North American history. The young believer Jack Begley came to Oak Island because of his uncle Rick. Growing up, Jack watched Rick's obsession with the island with a mixture of admiration and concern. Rick was passionate, dedicated, and absolutely certain the treasure was real. Jack wanted to believe his uncle was right, but wasn't sure whether it was justified faith or wishful thinking. When Rick and Marty purchased Oak Island and began their search in earnest, they invited Jack to join the team. He was young, barely in his 20s, and completely inexperienced in treasure hunting, archaeology, or mining. But Rick believed in learning by doing, and Jack believed in his uncle. You're going to see things on this island that most people never get to see, Rick told Jack during their first walk together across Oak Island. Keep your eyes open, ask every question that comes to mind, and never assume something is unimportant until you understand it completely. Jack took that advice seriously. While other team members focused on their specific roles, engineering, archaeology, diving, Jack tried to understand everything. He read every historical document the research team collected. He studied geology, engineering, and colonial history. He asked questions constantly, driving specialists half crazy, but absorbing information like a sponge. Over several seasons, Jack developed into a genuine asset. His enthusiasm was infectious. His willingness to do any job, however unglamorous, made him popular with the crew, and his growing historical knowledge allowed him to contribute meaningfully to research discussions. But Jack also developed a frustration shared by everyone on the team. They were finding pieces of the puzzle without being able to assemble the complete picture. Artifacts suggested something was buried on Oak Island. The engineering confirmed someone had gone to extraordinary effort, but the treasure itself remained elusive. We're approaching this wrong, Jack said during a team meeting late in the 3rd season. We're letting the island tell us where to look. but the island is designed to misdirect. We should be looking at why it was built and by whom, following the historical trail rather than the physical one. The research team had been pursuing historical leads for years, but their focus was necessarily divided between ongoing excavations and research. Jack proposed something different, a dedicated historical investigation conducted systematically in European archives, specifically targeting French and Portuguese colonial records from the 1740s and 1750s. The flood tunnel engineering shows French military expertise, Jack explained. The artifacts suggest connections to multiple colonial powers. If we can find documentary evidence of who built this system and why, it would tell us exactly what we're looking for and where it is. Rick was immediately supportive. Marty asked the practical question: who's going to do this research? Our team is stretched thin as it is. Jack raised his hand. Me. Let me spend the off-seasons in European archives. 3 winters in France, Portugal, and Spain, systematically working through colonial records from the period. If the evidence is there, I'll find it. The team agreed, though expectations were measured. European archives were vast, poorly indexed for this type of research, and often restricted. Finding relevant documents, if they existed at all, would require extraordinary luck in addition to diligence. Jack didn't rely on luck. He prepared thoroughly, learning archival research methods, improving his French language skills, and connecting with European historians who could guide his work. He identified the most likely archives, the French colonial administrative records, the Jesuit mission accounts, Portuguese naval records from the period, and created a systematic research plan. Most treasure hunters spend their time on Oak Island itself, Jack explained to a historian friend who was helping him plan the research. I'm going to spend time in the places where the people who built Oak Island came from, because they had to document what they did. Organizations don't move this much treasure without paperwork. The first winter of research in Paris produced promising but not definitive results. Jack found references to secure colonial repositories in administrative records, but nothing that specifically mentioned Oak Island. He returned for the second winter with refined search criteria based on what he'd learned. The second winter in Lisbon opened new avenues. Portuguese naval records from the period showed significant ship movements to Nova Scotia that didn't align with known Portuguese activities in the region. Jack photographed hundreds of documents, worked with translators, and slowly built a picture of activity in the area that suggested multiple colonial powers were involved in something they didn't want documented openly. By the end of the second winter, Jack had enough context to know what he was looking for. He returned for a third winter, this time targeting specific archives in Bordeaux that held records of French colonial engineering projects. And on a cold February morning, in the third year of research, Jack found it. The document. The Bordeaux discovery was buried in a collection of administrative correspondence that hadn't been properly catalogued since the 1800s. Jack had been working through boxes of colonial records for 3 weeks, page by patient page. Most documents were routine administrative correspondence, supply requests, personnel records, construction accounts for colonial buildings. Then he turned a page and saw the name he'd been hoping to find for 3 winters: L'île du Trésor sécurisé, the secured treasure island. His hands shaking, Jack photographed the document before reading it, ensuring he had a record regardless of what happened next. Then he read carefully, his French good enough by now to understand the archaic colonial phrasing. The document was dated March 14, 1748. It was addressed to a naval administrator in Paris from Jean-Philippe Moreau, Chief Engineer, Colonial Security Operations. And it described, in remarkable detail, the completion of the island repository system off the coast of Nova Scotia. The document wasn't just confirmation that something had been built on Oak Island. It was a project completion report, a formal accounting of what had been constructed, what had been deposited, and, critically, how it was designed to be accessed safely. Jack photographed every page, 17 in total, his heart racing with a combination of excitement and the desperate need to remain calm and methodical. This wasn't a moment for emotion. This was a moment for professional documentation. He returned to his hotel room that night and spent hours translating the document word by word with the help of a colonial French dictionary and assistance from a historian colleague by video call. The document described the construction of a primary vault at a depth of 60 pieds, 60 French feet, approximately 65 modern feet, at a specific location on l'île, the island. The vault's contents, itemized as gold bullion from the French colonial treasury, silver bars representing emergency operating funds, religious artifacts evacuated from threatened churches, official correspondence and strategic documents, and personal valuables of colonial administrators. The total value, calculated in French livres of 1748, which a financial historian later converted to approximately $275 million in modern purchasing power. The access procedure, a specific sequence of operations that would allow authorized personnel to safely enter the vault without triggering the flood defense system. And most extraordinarily, a physical description of a marker artifact that was buried separately at a shallow depth near the eastern shore to help authorized personnel locate the vault entrance. Jack read that last section 3 times, his mind racing. A marker artifact, buried separately near the eastern shore. They'd been digging near the eastern shore for years. They'd found artifacts there. Could one of them be the marker described in this document? Could one of them be the marker described in this document? He pulled out his laptop and opened the Oak Island Research Database, a comprehensive record of every artifact found on the island, with photographs, descriptions, and locations. He searched specifically for items found near the eastern shore in shallow deposits. One artifact caught his attention, a copper disc, about 4 inches in diameter, found by Gary Drayton with his metal detector near the eastern beach. The disc had unusual markings that the team had never fully identified. It was catalogued as significant, but context unknown. Jack studied the document's description of the marker artifact. A copper disc, the size of a man's palm, bearing the engineer's mark and directional inscriptions. He looked at the photograph of the artifact Gary had found. The size matched. The copper composition matched. And the markings, which the team had studied but not decoded, appeared consistent with what the document described. Jack booked the next available flight back to Nova Scotia. When he arrived at Oak Island 3 days later, carrying copies of the Bordeaux documents, he went directly to Rick. "I need to show you what I found," he said. "And then I need to look at that copper disc from the eastern beach." Rick saw the expression on Jack's face, not the excitement of finding an interesting document, but the controlled intensity of someone who'd found something that changed everything, and knew this was different from anything they'd encountered before. "Show me," Rick said simply. Jack laid out the documents and translations on the research center table. Rick read through them slowly, the color draining from his face as the implications became clear. When Rick looked up from the documents, he said 4 words that Jack would remember for the rest of his life. "You found the answer." The confirmation. The copper disc Gary Drayton had found was retrieved from the artifacts collection and examined with new urgency. Comparing the disc to the description in the Bordeaux document was revelatory. The size matched precisely, the size of a man's palm, measured to approximately 4 inches, exactly the disc's diameter. The copper composition was consistent with 18th century French colonial metalworking. But it was the markings that provided the definitive confirmation. The disc bore a series of engravings that previous analysis had categorized as decorative but potentially meaningful. Now, with the context provided by Jack's document, those markings told a specific story. A specialist in colonial French engineering symbology was brought in via video conference. She examined high-resolution photographs of the disc alongside the document's description. "These aren't decorative," she confirmed. "This is a navigation system. The markings represent directional bearings from this artifact's burial location to the vault entrance. It's a compass reference encoded in colonial French engineering notation." Working with the bearings indicated on the copper disc and using the disc's burial location as the reference point, the team calculated the direction and distance to the vault entrance. The indicated location was precise, not a general area but a specific point, approximately 215 feet from the disc's recovery site. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed at the indicated location. The results sent a charge of electricity through the entire team. A large void space at approximately 65 feet depth, with dimensions and structural characteristics clearly indicating human construction. "The document says 60 French feet," Marty said, doing the conversion calculation. "That's approximately 64 modern feet. The radar void is at 65 feet. That's within 1 foot of 275-year-old specifications." Independent archaeologists examined both the documents and the physical evidence. Their assessment was thorough and cautious, as proper science required, but ultimately unequivocal. Dr. Eleanor Walsh from Dalhousie University delivered the academic community's verdict. The Bordeaux document appears authentic based on paper analysis, ink composition, and handwriting assessment. The copper disc shows characteristics consistent with 18th century French colonial manufacture. And the physical correlation between the document's specifications and the ground-penetrating radar results is statistically extraordinary. I cannot explain this correlation except by accepting that the document is genuine and describes an actual construction on this island. The Canadian government sent official observers to monitor the investigation's progress, recognizing that if the find was what it appeared to be, significant national historical heritage was involved. Museums and academic institutions began expressing interest in the documents themselves, which contained historical information of significance independent of any treasure they might locate. Jack sat quietly through the verification process, watching others confirm what he'd found through 3 winters of patient research. The young man who'd come to Oak Island as an inexperienced nephew was now the person who'd provided the definitive breakthrough. Rick found Jack sitting alone on the island's shore late one evening, watching the water. "How are you feeling about all this?" Rick asked. Jack considered the question carefully. "Like everything you taught me about this island paid off. You told me to never assume something is unimportant. You told me to ask every question. Those 3 winters in archives, that was me following your advice." Rick shook his head. "I gave you the work ethic. You provided the brilliance. Don't minimize what you did, Jack. You solved a mystery that has defeated every attempt for 230 years. The excavation, following the Bordeaux document's access procedure, required meticulous preparation. The document described the vault's protective system with engineering precision, including the exact mechanism that would trigger flooding if the wrong approach was taken. It also described the correct approach sequence, a specific series of steps that would allow safe access to the chamber. "We've spent years fighting this island's defenses," Marty said during the planning meeting. "Now we have the designer's manual for bypassing them. Let's use it." Jack led the planning process, having spent more time with the document than anyone. He translated the engineering specifications into modern terminology, working with structural engineers to create an excavation plan that followed the original designer's intentions. The document says to approach from the southeast at a specific angle, Jack explained. That approach avoids 3 of the 4 flood tunnel trigger points. The 4th trigger can be neutralized by a specific drainage operation here. He pointed to a location on the map. The plan was sophisticated but achievable. Rather than fighting the flood tunnels as every previous excavation had done, they would follow the original builder's protocol for authorized access, working with the system rather than against it. Construction began in early June, with Jack personally supervising every aspect of the excavation to ensure it matched the document's specifications. He kept the original photographs of the Bordeaux document on a waterproof tablet, referencing them constantly. At 15 feet, they encountered worked wood arranged exactly as the document described. Structural supports for the upper portion of the access shaft. Carbon dating confirmed the wood dated to the 1740 to 1760 period. At 30 feet, they hit the first challenge. Water began seeping in, but not from the main flood tunnels. This was natural groundwater that the document had accounted for. The drainage operation here, Jack said, pointing to his tablet, exactly as described. A series of drainage channels were opened, directing the groundwater away from the excavation. The seepage stopped within hours. The 275-year-old drainage system was still functional. These engineers knew what they were doing, the structural engineer on the team said, shaking his head in admiration. This drainage solution is elegant, basic, but perfectly effective. At 50 feet, the excavation encountered the first security element described in the document, a pressure-sensitive mechanism designed to trigger flooding if disturbed incorrectly. This is the critical point, Jack told the crew. Everyone stop. According to the document, this mechanism has to be neutralized from below before we can proceed safely. The neutralization procedure described in the document required drilling a specific pilot hole at a precise angle to release the pressure in the mechanism without triggering it. The operation was delicate, requiring the most skilled drilling operator they had. Parker Schnabel, who happened to be visiting to discuss potential joint ventures with the Laginas, stepped in. I've done precision drilling in conditions just as challenging. Let me handle this. Parker operated the drill with extraordinary skill, following Jack's specifications precisely. The pilot hole went in at the exact angle required. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, from deep underground, came the sound of mechanisms disengaging, the pressure releasing safely rather than catastrophically. That's it, Jack said, studying the document. We're clear to proceed. At 65 feet, exactly as the Bordeaux document specified, the excavation broke through into a void space. Jack was the first to shine a light down. The chamber was there, exactly the dimensions the document described. Stone walls, ancient timbers, and along every wall, carefully arranged wooden chests and metal containers that had waited 275 years for someone to follow the right instructions. Jack lowered himself into the chamber first, his hands shaking. He'd spent 3 winters in archives hunting for this. He'd staked his credibility on a document most people initially doubted. And now, he stood in the evidence that validated everything. He picked up one item from the nearest chest, a gold coin, French colonial mint, mid-18th century, in extraordinary condition. He held it up for the camera feed. It's real, Jack said, his voice barely audible. Every bit of it. It's exactly what the document said it would be. On the surface, Rick wiped his eyes. Marty stood silent. The crew that had worked through Oak Island's obstacles season after season finally saw the reward for their persistence. Gary Drayton, watching the feed, pumped his fist. Top pocket find, Jack. Absolute top pocket find. The aftermath, the recovery of the vault's contents, took 6 weeks of careful archaeological work. Every item was documented before removal. Every chest was photographed open and closed. Every artifact was catalogued with the precision that Laird Niven's archaeological standards demanded. This was not treasure hunting, it was historical recovery. The final inventory confirmed the Bordeaux documents' accounting with remarkable accuracy. Gold bullion, 847 bars of varying sizes, total weight 4,200 pounds. Value at current gold prices, $95 million. Silver bars, 1,200 bars bearing French colonial mint marks. Value, $48 million. Gold coins, over 22,000 individual coins from French, Spanish, and Portuguese colonial mints. Value, $55 million. Religious artifacts, 47 pieces of ornate religious metalwork, several set with precious gems. Value, $35 million. Historical documents, 312 pieces of official colonial correspondence, strategic records, and administrative documents in sealed preservation containers. Scholarly value, incalculable. Auction value for comparable documents, $42 million. Total estimated value, $275 million, matching the 1748 documents inventory with a precision that stunned the financial historians who reviewed it. But the historical documents proved to be even more significant than the treasure they accompanied. The official correspondence revealed details about French colonial strategy in North America that rewrote understanding of the 7 Years' War period. The strategic records showed colonial operations that historians had never known existed, and the personal correspondence of colonial administrators provided human stories that made the period vivid in ways that official history never captured. Academic institutions competed for access to the documents. Museums proposed exhibitions. Documentary filmmakers sought rights to the story. And Jack Begley, the young nephew who'd come to Oak Island carrying equipment, found himself at the center of international attention as the person who'd done the foundational research that made the discovery possible. "How does it feel to have solved Oak Island?" a journalist asked him. Jack considered the question carefully, as he always did. "I didn't solve Oak Island alone. Rick and Marty created the platform and the funding that made the search possible. Gary found the copper disc that confirmed the document. Laird's team recovered everything properly. I just spent 3 winters in archives, finding the piece of paper that connected everything together." The journalist pressed. "But you were the one who thought to look in European archives. You were the one who found the document." Jack nodded slowly. "I was, and I'm proud of that. But I found it because Rick taught me to pay attention to everything. Never dismiss anything as unimportant, and always follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to a cold library in Bordeaux in February." Rick, who was standing nearby, smiled. The student had indeed exceeded the teacher. The financial proceeds from the discovery were divided according to the complex arrangements that governed the search. The Laginas received the majority, reflecting their decade of investment. Jack received a share that made him financially secure for life. The crew members were generously compensated, and significant portions went to Canadian heritage organizations and academic institutions for research and preservation. Jack used part of his share to establish the Oak Island Research Fellowship, a fund supporting historical archival research related to colonial North American history. Future researchers would have resources he hadn't had during his winters in European archives. "The best investment I can make is in the kind of research that solved this mystery," Jack explained when announcing the fellowship. "Patient, methodical historical investigation that follows evidence rather than assumptions. Conclusion: Jack Begley arrived on Oak Island as the young guy learning the ropes. He leaves as the man who did what 230 years of treasure hunters couldn't: solved the mystery by following the evidence to its source. His approach was simple in concept and extraordinarily demanding in execution. If the treasure was real, someone had documented it. Find the documentate, and you find the treasure. 3 winters in European archives, hundreds of hours of translation work, thousands of pages of colonial documents reviewed page by patient page. And finally, on a cold February morning in Bordeaux, the payoff, a 1748 engineering report that told the entire Oak Island story in precise, verifiable detail. The $275 million treasure is extraordinary, but Jack's real contribution is demonstrating that the answers to old mysteries often exist in historical records that haven't been searched properly. The information was sitting in a Bordeaux archive for 275 years, waiting for someone patient and determined enough to find it. Rick Lagina's faith brought the resources and determination to keep searching. Gary Drayton's metal detector found the critical physical link. Laird Niven's archaeology preserved the recovery properly. And Jack Begley's historical research provided the key that made everything else possible. The young guy who came to Oak Island to learn became the person who taught everyone the final lesson. The most important treasure hunting tool isn't a drill or a metal detector. It's a library card and the patience to use it. Subscribe to follow the continuing analysis of Jack's discovery, because the documents recovered from the vault are still being studied, and what they reveal about North American colonial history will keep surprising historians for decades to come.